Hey folks, so I just saw an article come up in my phone from Tony Howard there from Astrology University. Lovely, lovely guy. And he is thinking about this question of how long does it take to learn to read birth charts. So that's what he's contemplating. So I read the article and I thought, what a great question. And I thought I would just use this medium to sort of offer my 2 cents on that question. And I was planning to kind of go away and think about it and then come back with a kind of considered response to it. But I think I'm just going to see what comes up in my mind as I contemplate this question. So I don't really know exactly where this video will end up, but I'm going to just sit down with you and chat about this question of how long does it take to learn to read birth charts. So my first thought is that there is no prescribed sort of time for anyone to learn to read a birth chart. I don't think there's any sort of, okay, it takes 5 years or 10 years. I think as a general rule in astrology that the longer you spend doing it, the better you become. So that is, I think, a very, very good rule of thumb, that the longer you've been practicing, the better you are at doing it. So, there's no sort of predetermined time. You're only able to read a birth chart after a year or two. Okay, my camera just went out of focus. I think it's back in focus now. So no prescribed time. However, astrology is a language, and I think people it would be good for them to think about it in this way, that it's sort of like learning a foreign language. When you don't speak a language, your brain is sort of embedded in the structures of your native tongue, your mind, how you process information, how you think and perceive. So to learn a different language is actually learning a different way of perceiving, and it takes time. So people who learn a foreign language, they get better year after year and they become more fluent. So I think that astrology itself is like that. It's a language and it takes time to become fluent, and you become fluent by speaking astrology, by speaking this language every day in some way, shape or form. So I think that's a big part of the question. If people saw astrology as a language, then that would help them to understand the learning curve a bit, because there's no way that someone who has just been learning French for 3 months is going to have the competence of a native speaker. That's just what we understand. All right, so there's that. And it made me think of something that happened to me recently, where someone commented on a video and said, is this video for people who are already, in the know? She was finding it difficult to connect to what I was saying because she didn't know astrology. That was her, contention. And so, she did not find it informative or educational because she was saying that, okay, you're kind of, you're speaking as if I know what you're talking about. And that kind of brings me back to this question of it being a language. In other words, if I know that, how do I get this out? Let's think about this. All right, so let's go back to my days in university. And what I would do, so my first degree is in philosophy and politics. My second degree is in global public policy, right? So in my first degree, I would, sit down in the library. And of course, you're making that jump from high school to college or to university. And you have that big jump to make. So by the time that you're reading all of these articles, you're not really fluent in that yet. So you have to sort of make that jump. But in making that jump, for me, it was very, very helpful to just read the articles that were, let's say, above my level, because it forced me to learn quickly. So if there was something that I didn't understand, I would go and research that thing, but I jumped right in terms of reading things that were let's say, not at undergrad level, or, you know, articles that were obviously written by people who had been spending a lot of time, you know, thinking about these subjects. So that's one way of learning, where for me, perhaps my own learning style is, you know, get familiar with the terms that are used in astrology. So she was saying, oh, you know, I found it very distracting that you use the term Mercury retrograde a lot. And I'm like, well, that's what it's called. So if you don't know what that means, perhaps you should take out your phone and go and Google that. And then as you go along and as you listen, you begin to comprehend more of what I'm saying, because astrology cannot be learned overnight. Reading a birth chart cannot be achieved overnight. You need to build up levels of competence that happen over time. So, you know, so I think perhaps it seems to me like I'm answering two questions. One is how long to read the birth chart in itself. Secondly is how long does it take to be proficient in astrology as a whole? Because obviously reading natal charts is just one part of astrology. So for me, I equally read individual birth charts in client consults, but also, as you know, I do provide more collective astrology, more collective content here, content on collective transits and meditating on that, the new moons, the astrology of the month, all of that, which is not about the individual birth chart. So perhaps as I'm speaking here and clarifying my own thoughts, that it's kind of like two questions. One is, how long does it take to speak astrology well, to be competent or fluent in that language? And obviously, if you're competent or fluent in that language, you can take those skills to the birth chart. Yeah, the chart is what we read in astrology. So, you know, it's two parts. It's two parts of one question, essentially. To go back to what she was saying, you know, that's what it's called. It's called Mercury retrograde. These are the terms that we use that are germane to the language of astrology. If you're going to be taking in astrology, you have to learn the terms that are germane to this discipline. So there's no going around that. That what we call a planet appearing to move backward is called retrograde. It stations, it goes retrograde. These are the terms that we use to mean particular things, just like how you would learn a different word in a language. You're trying to learn the word for kitchen or the word for book. You have to now go and learn that intentionally. You get what I'm saying? So there's that. So Tony was saying in his article that it's not possible to learn to read a birth chart in a weekend workshop, and I absolutely agree with him. So, you know, he's cautioning people to not believe the hype. If you're being sold a course online that promises that you'll be able to read charts after 4 days or even 6 weeks or even 10 days. So I certainly agree with that. And I think that speaks to something that is not specific to astrology, but specific to where we are on the globe right now in terms of people's expectations that things should happen overnight. You know, this sort of the pride of the discipline of astrology, you know, of learning something 20 years, 25 years. It's been 20 years for me, studying, amassing, you know, letting your brain kind of develop new ways of seeing. That takes time. And I think that we are not respecting just the question anymore of time. You know, we want to sort of just learn something quickly or have the expectation that I don't have to do any work to understand or to appreciate something that has so much nuance and depth. Astrology is not something that, it's not superficial. It has so many nuances. I mean, a birth chart is this sort of cacophony of different factors. You have to blend sign, house, and planet aspects. So there's too many layers for you to just think that you can learn that, to do that in a weekend workshop. And people, I think, are impatient with the effort that it takes through time to learn and to master astrology, and also to learn and master the birth chart. Now, having said that, I think that some people too get stuck in a phase of just studying, excuse me, getting pins and needles here, and just change my seating position. So some people, get stuck at a phase of just studying. That's okay. Not everyone has to be a practitioner. And I also think that using astrology to counsel is a totally different skill set. So you can read a chart, but knowing how to talk to a client in a counseling capacity is a different skill entirely. That is a different kettle of fish. So that's my opinion. That's someone out there playing some very, very loud music, as they are apt to do in Jamaica. We like to play our music loud as well. Yeah, some people get stuck at one level, and they're just studying, and they don't make the jump. And that the jump is doing charts every day, practicing every day, not just reading and theorizing, but letting it come together practically for you as you learn to read a chart. Or not just even read in the sense of telling someone, oh, it says this, therefore you are like this, but sitting down in a dialogue with someone and saying, hey, Mercury in Scorpio has this general meaning. Do you recognize yourself in any of that? And the person will say yes. And they will say, but there's something else going on here too. And then you will see that they're saying something else, and then you'll be able to map that onto, let's say, a Mercury-Uranus aspect. So having the dialogue, letting it translate from theory to some kind of practical application is important. So some people spend all of their time just reading, and nothing is wrong with that. But if you want to learn to read a birth chart, you have to read the birth chart. So I always say, you don't learn to drive by reading the driver's manual or, doing your driver's test, the written part. You have to go out and drive the car. And even when you've gotten your license and you've just started to drive, you're still a new driver, and it takes time to just understand the subtleties and the nuances of driving and the little signals. And you intuitively know that some asshole is going to just stop suddenly in front of you and just, make things very difficult for you. So you immediately know, okay, let me back off from this car and not spoil my day. So it's the same thing with astrology, that after a while, you get used to a certain way of perceiving. Will that take 5 years? I don't know. 10 years? I don't know. What I do know is that the more you do it, the more you immerse yourself in astrology. So 1 is immersion, and 2 is immersion over a long period of time. That's the only way to have a certain command of this language. 1 is immersion, and 2, immersion over a period of time, a long period of time. So that the thing with astrologers is that the older we get, the better we are at doing our jobs. And that's delightful for us, because the more, as we get older, amass more life experience, as we see more charts, our language and perception, our symbolic perception, is strengthened. So commit, if you want to learn astrology and learn to read a birth chart, commit to the time it takes. Delight in the fact that this thing is going to demand a lot from you. But in this day and age, I think that thinking with depth and nuance is sort of not so fashionable anymore. I'm very old school, so lots of Capricorn in the chart there. So I'm kind of old school with certain things. Reading a book through, cover to cover, allowing the information to assimilate and to deepen in my consciousness, that takes time. So astrology is not for the faint of heart, in that if you want to do this thing, and if you want to read charts, if you want to do that, it's going to demand something of you. And I think that's such a good thing, that astrology makes demands on us. This science, this intuitive art and science, is demanding us to rise to its level. And I think that's something that is really just good. So by the time you are becoming fluent, you feel a sense, oh yes, I'm edified. I'm edified in my consciousness. I'm edified in my understanding of this thing. So it's not going to drop to meet you. You have to rise to meet it. Lots of dogs there barking in the background. But yeah, so you have to rise to meet the astrology. And unfortunately, I think a lot of what is happening is that the true demand and rigor of this subject is sort of, with this day and in this day and age, sort of being watered down, in a sense that you think, oh yeah, let me just sell you an online course and there, that's it. Of course, online courses do help, but it's years, in my view, of mastery. It's years of practice. It's years of speaking this language. And as you speak the language, the behavioral psychologists or whatever they do, the neurologists will tell you that your actual brain circuitry, your brain circuitry actually changes when you learn a new skill. So in other words, your actual physical brain changes as you adjust to a new skill. It's the same thing with astrology, that your brain physically is adapting to accommodate the practicing of a new kind of perception. So that's what I think. So yeah, Tony was talking about this question of excitement. You just started to learn astrology and you're very, very excited and all of that, and that's great. I think the excitement, he said, is followed by overwhelm. That's one thing. You say, whoa, there's a lot here in this rabbit hole. So then that has to be followed by some deepening process. And the deepening is, like I said, through immersion, consistency of practice. So excitement is great. It propels us. It's kind of cardinal. It's like, yeah, let's get out the gate there. Yeah. But then there has to be a process of deepening. And that's where many people sort of leave astrology and they only stay at a particular level, because the excitement stage is sort of very lateral. You're picking up a lot of different information from different places, but then the next phase to deepen it into your consciousness is often what is missing. So those are a few of my thoughts on the fly about what this involves. Of course, like I always say, and I think Tony in fact says it here, he says keep a journal, write down your observation, but also begin to get confident in your own interpretation. Something happens to you. So when you learn a foreign language, you often still think in your own native language, and then to produce the foreign language, you're kind of translating it from your native tongue into the other language. Now after a while you begin to think in the foreign language, and after a while in astrology you begin to think astrologically. So you're not sort of making this two-step thing. You think astrologically, and and that's what I think people don't kind of get. Learning to think astrologically is a skill. It's like learning a new language. So I think the best analogy here, as I've been saying ad nauseum at this point, is to think of it as a language. Yeah. And after a while, you begin to think in the terms of the language itself that you're learning. And that's when you know that you are getting on there. I did Spanish for a few years, and there have been a few occasions where I've been powerfully aware of me thinking something in Spanish and not going through, okay, how do I say this again? How do I get this English thought into this Spanish sentence? And in those moments, I know that, okay, I'm getting it now. I've understood something here. It's coming from me in a way that is organic, that kind of thing. So yeah, so don't sweat it in terms of thinking that it has to take 5 or 10 years. Just know that it takes commitment, consistency, practice, immersion. Those are the 4 keys. So those are my thoughts on this question of how long does it take to read birth charts and to also be fluent in astrology. Hope my rambling was helpful here. And until next time, folks, talk soon.